Imagine a land of uncompromised beauty, with vistas unchanged since the days of Lewis and Clark. Imagine a place where rivers can still inspire wonder and fear, where mountains conspire to block our every move, and canyon walls limit our entrances and our exits. Imagine a state where adventure cuts through the seasons, where even the steady business of making a living can seem downright romantic. Imagine a state called Idaho. It was along this very stretch of the Clearwater River that the Lewis and Clark expedition traveled in dugout canoes on its way to the Pacific Ocean. 200 years later, we're still trying to recreate that splendid adventure, still trying to imagine what it was like, how they felt, what they saw. Hi, I'm Bruce Reichert, host of Outdoor Idaho. A state like Idaho can do that to you. It can cause imaginations to work overtime. Perhaps it's because the past is still so vivid here. Perhaps it's because there's so much that remains untouched by the hand of man. To the first explorers, it must have seemed unimaginably wild and untamed. A land to pass through as quickly as possible on the way to places more hospitable. This was the last state to be discovered, and with good reason. This wondrous corridor between the Great Plains and the Pacific Ocean that we now call Idaho nearly defeated the expedition of Captains Lewis and Clark. The Corps of Discovery had hoped to find an easy water route to the Pacific. In fact, the science of the day had prepared them for such an event. We can only imagine their profound amazement as those first United States citizens to cross the Continental Divide stared headlong into a seemingly endless progression of mountains. "40 years later and far to the south, another expedition began working its way across the Idaho landscape. 50,000 emigrants braved scorching heat, clouds of dust, disease, and an uncertain future in search of greener pastures to the west. The 2,000-mile Oregon Trail became the longest overland journey that Americans would attempt. It was also the nation's longest cemetery. Their primary concern may have been Indian raids, but in reality, the emigrants had more to fear from the Snake River Plain, with its sharp-edged basalt and desert conditions. For many, the trek through present-day Idaho was the worst part of their journey. Still, we attempt to recreate scenes from that distant past. And even as we march into the next century, we know in our hearts that it is the adventures of that bygone era that will inhabit our dreams, that spark our imaginations.
Well, I think that anytime you create a country, create a culture, create a state, imagination is integral in it. Because of this historical event of having had the region leaped over, having had the region written about poorly and badly in many, many diaries and journals, this sense of historical apology permeates a lot of the locals, a lot of the mentality. And I think underneath that, however, Idahoans are very, very proud of their state and of the geography. And I think the thing that I like about Idaho most is its geographical and geological and biological complexity. You can change worlds in minutes. And we who wander among the Idaho hills and valleys get to change our geographical setting very, very quickly. And I love that. I love that kind of complexity.
Idaho, home of famous potatoes and vast wilderness. Idaho, known for the brilliance of its northern lakes and the quiet grandeur of its southern desert canyons. No wonder she's been called the Riddle of the Rockies. Their shadow hangs over every facet of our lives. They are the source of our rivers, a refuge for wildlife, a determiner of rainfall. More than anything else, mountains define our state. They define our sense of place and our relationship to others. They are where they are because 100 million years ago, when Idaho was seacoast property, two restless, shifting plates collided along the western edge of the continent. That unimaginable pressure directly under Idaho helped create an enormous mass of granite that we know as the Idaho batholith.
Idaho is a very mountainous state. Everywhere you look, it's wrinkled and rucked and pleated with mountain ranges. I think the word for mountain building is orogeny, and Idaho is certainly orogeny's workshop. For me, Idaho has the most magical names for its mountains of any western state. You think of the Lost River Range, the Grand Tetons, the White Clouds, the Sawtooths, or the Seven Devils. Beautiful names, all of them. My friend, an Idaho poet writing about Idaho, Carrie Webster, said, "Everywhere mountains, gospel, soldiers, bitter roots. If inspiration lags, say gravure." A wonderful way of looking at Idaho.
But Idaho's mountains come with a price. The very mountains that blocked Meriwether Lewis's access to the sea still divide us north and south. And yet they give us what few other states can claim: a chance to lose ourselves, a chance to reclaim that necessary connection to the natural world. They give us elbow room to fish and hunt and play in a wild sanctuary far removed from the endless rush of the outside world. Someone once wrote that rivers are the mountain's way of talking to the sea. And Idaho's rivers and streams speak a wondrously poetic language. They start out softly, quietly, some as snowfields, some as springs. But in a good water year, they quickly swell to raging torrents. In a single year, nearly 100 million acre-feet of water will fall on Idaho's mountains and plains, to be captured by romantic-sounding rivers like the shadowy St. Joe and the Coeur d'Alene, the Kootenai and the Bruneau, the Lemhi and the Henry's Fork. Idaho's rivers speak to the well-being of the state. They gather our dreams, and they gather our refuse. They are the barometer that tells us how we are doing. The adventurous and the enterprising have all heard the river's seductive song. In July of 1936, a successful expedition down the Salmon River heralded the beginnings of a new river sport. No one lost his life, no boats wrecked beyond repair. The River of No Return, the longest undammed river in the lower 48, the river that had stopped Lewis and Clark, had been tamed, sort of. Further north, men were riding rivers and logs for profit. Today, it's hard to imagine a more hazardous occupation. The last of the log drives ended in 1971 with the building of Dworshak Dam on the North Fork of the Clearwater River. In 1968, Idaho's rivers gained national prominence with the passage of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. Included in that original legislation was the Middle Fork of the Salmon River, widely regarded as the premier wild and scenic river in America, and the Lochsaw River, much like it looked when the Corps of Discovery happened upon it 200 years ago, and the Middle Fork of the Clearwater, one of the strongholds of the dwindling steelhead and salmon runs, and the Selway, as pristine as any river in the world, a true wilderness experience for those fortunate enough to draw a permit. The Forest Service allows only one rafting party per day on the river during June and July.
It's an all-wilderness drainage, and there's no disturbance on the upper end to change to impair the water quality. And it's a native fishery, too. There's no fish stocked in here. This is like the gene pool for the West Slope cutthroat trout. We've had people catch 100 fish a day. That's amazing. I don't know where else you can do that in America.
That's a pretty fish.
There's a little bit of pioneer spirit in all of us. To be able to come out and see this land the way it was when Lewis and Clark came through in 1805, or the way the Indians saw it, it does something to people.
If mountains are the state's defining characteristic, then Idaho's rivers are our most valuable natural resource. They are the engine that propels us into the future. Their power extends beyond the tug and pull of the current. They unite us in a common emotional language. seems that not everyone appreciates the Idaho desert. Shortly after the Lewis and Clark expedition, stories surfaced of hapless fur trappers, racked by thirst and driven to near insanity by their inability to reach the waters of the Snake River. For some, this high desert country will forever remain a devil's landscape, a place to pass through as quickly as possible. But others have actually chosen to live here, finding refuge in the solace of open spaces.
And I don't have to go to the church to get near God. If I want to go to the canyon like we were yesterday, that does it for me. Or I can do it out here if I want to. I mean, it's that big. I think it's the bigness of the country, and it just, it enlivens me.
I'm particularly attracted to the high desert. And when I discovered myself looking down, looking closer at the landscape than I had been previously, that's when I really started seeing things that were beautiful. The flowers, the plants, the snakes, the ground itself, the contours, the colors. The ground began to undulate and roll. And then when I'd look up, I'd feel like I was on a great raft, kind of out in the ocean, you know, and there's no purpose at looking at the horizon. You just look back down and get about your business again. The desert did that for me. It brought me home, brought me to myself and to my inner sense of peace. Ed Abbey said desert solitude, and when you find that, you're very happy.
Those who wrest from the desert her secrets discover a world of rare beauty, unveiled in a timetable that stretches back millions of years. Eons of snowmelt from the Owyhee Mountains have sliced through basalt and rhyolite, leaving evidence of a remarkable journey across southern Idaho. The journey of a series of volcanoes that erupted as the North American continent slid southwestward over a hot spot in the Earth's mantle. That hot spot is now beneath Wyoming. 13 million years ago, this was America's Yellowstone. More than we might imagine, lakes have dominated the Idaho landscape. Lake Idaho, Lakes Payette and Rathdrum and Clarkia, Lake Bonneville, Glacial Lake Missoula. The lakes and the floods associated with them have left their mark in subtle and enduring ways. Vestiges of the last great ice age live on in the lakescape of northern Idaho. Pend Oreille, Idaho's largest and deepest lake, home to the world-famous Girard rainbow trout. The depth of Lake Pend Oreille, almost 1,200 feet in some places, has made this an ideal laboratory to test submarine technology. Lake Coeur d'Alene, a world-class tourist destination. And Priest Lake, the most northerly of Idaho's big lakes, and in many respects the most beautiful. They are all resplendent jewels in an emerald landscape. Blue mergings of land and water impart to the Idaho Panhandle an expressiveness that is legendary. In the 1920s, the actress Nell Shipman brought her production crew to Priest Lake to capture a beauty that Hollywood could not duplicate. Later, folks would arrive for the sightseeing and for the fishing. Throughout the state, lakes and ponds of all sizes are nature's factories of life, vital habitat for fish and wildlife. And nowhere is this more evident than at the National Wildlife Refuge at Bear Lake, Idaho's southernmost waterway. The soluble carbonates in the water produce an enchanting turquoise sheen that only adds to an already enchanting landscape.
I would be terribly homesick if I didn't have the lake to look at every morning and every noon and every night. It's a part of me that I love. If it's calm like it is this morning, that will be an emerald blue, just a striking color. It's just such a beautiful sight anytime you look at it. And like I said this morning, there was just thousands and thousands of diamonds that just sparkled. It just really talks to you.
Sprinkled along the state's granite backbone are prime examples of glacial handiwork. Compared to lakes and ponds at lower elevations, these sparkling jewels provide a precarious existence for resident trout, who must rely upon insect hatches and the minerals leached from the granite. Yet in most years, the fish manage quite well, providing one more reason to take a wilderness hike.
Well, right now I think I'll go ahead and cast while you're getting set up.
A lake is the landscape's most beautiful and expressive feature, wrote Henry David Thoreau. He called them the eyes of the earth, looking into which the beholder measures the depth of his own nature. They are the phantoms of the forest. They frighten us. They inspire us. They provide us sustenance, as well as a mirror into our own humanity. If the beasts of the forest were to vanish, we would all feel a great loneliness of spirit. Wild animals are our connection to that time when we too lived close to the land, when we understood the movements of the deer and the elk, the migration of the ducks and the geese, the journey of the kings.
I can only tell you, I guess, the things that my grandparents told me, which was how thick the salmon were, where you could walk across the back of the salmon during the salmon runs, and how exciting it was to travel to the fishing spots and see the people you may not have seen for a while, and to share in taking out the fish. And a lot of those things, you know, with the decline of the fish, a lot of those experiences are lost. We won't get to experience them again. And so the oral tradition, again, is so important to share in showing our children that this was how it was.
To imagine a world where the rivers ran red with fish and the plains shook with bison is to imagine our past. By some reliable estimates, 30 million large animals inhabited the land west of the Rockies. Among them, 5 million buffalo, 1 million bighorn sheep, 10 million pronghorn, 2 million elk, 5 million mule deer, with bear sightings every 50 yards along the rivers during the salmon runs. Of all the states in the Intermountain West, Idaho comes closest to resembling that past. Our geology and our determination to honor that past means that within our borders, we can still live in communion with wildlife. Over 360 different wildlife species coexist in the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness. This is the single largest tract of wild land in the lower 48. It is our playground, but it is their home. What I believe, wrote the poet William Stafford, is all animals have one soul. Over the land they love, they crisscross forever. Nimipu, the people. That's what they called themselves. These expert horsemen and traders befriended Lewis and Clark, supplying them with food and horses, teaching them how to build canoes for their journey to the ocean. For hundreds of years before contact with the Corps of Discovery, the Nez Perce had lived and died in the land west of the Rockies. Along with the Shoshone-Bannock, the Coeur d'Alene, and other tribes, they had managed the landscape as a hunting continent, transforming it in subtle yet important ways. It is this changed landscape that we imagine when we think of the original West. Four years after Lewis and Clark headed home, fur trappers arrived. Their approach was different. Their style would set the pattern for years to come. Arrive, take what you want, then leave. This was the era of the mountain men and the rendezvous. Propelled by the demand for beaver pelts, 500 to 600 trappers braved the dangers and worked trap lines in the Snake River country. The days of the mountain men would last less than 50 years, but the adventures of men like Jim Bridger and Jedediah Smith, and the yearly rendezvous in places like Pierre's Hole and Bear Lake, still fuel our imaginations today, more than 150 years later.
Prime hide here. I just been fleshing it out, do a little trading.
Oh, I got a lantern here.
Do you? I need a lantern.
Trade a lantern for something?
You need a hide?
Need a hide.
Do you? All right. There you go. Good deal. That's a good buff there.
Good swap.
In the 1860s, the population of present-day Idaho exploded. Unemployed men poured into Pierce, the Boise Basin, Silver City, the Yankee Fork. It was a reverse migration, populated first by miners from the West Coast, who hurried to stake claims along the clear mountain streams. Boomtowns usually have 2 good years, then they bust. It's the nature of placer mining. A few miners did strike it rich. Most, however, would drift away on the rumors of yet another hot prospect, on yet another Idaho creek. Further north, the best loggers in the world were powering through the largest white pine forest on the continent. It was not unusual for white pine to grow 200 feet tall. One tree could supply wood for 3 houses.
These old lumberjacks, they were real smart, intelligent people, a lot of ingenuity. In fact, nowadays they'd probably be doctors and lawyers and such, and hard workers, but they used their brain about as much as their brawn. They had little tricks for pretty near everything, and they knew just exactly how to do it and how to keep from getting killed. And it was a pleasure to be around those old guys.
In sharp contrast to the bustle of mining towns and logging camps were the farming communities springing up along the Utah border. The township of Franklin was a model of organization and holds the distinction of being Idaho's first town. Even though pioneers on the Oregon Trail passed through southern Idaho as early as 1840, no one cared to stop. Franklin wasn't created until 20 years later, and even then those first residents assumed they were still in Utah. As other towns sprang up, so too did a grand scheme, one that would surpass even the most ambitious plans of loggers and miners. Trappers had called the Snake that accursed mad river. Why not take its water and spread it out over the volcanic ash of 1,000,000 windstorms? Why not turn the most desolate stretch of the Oregon Trail into a garden paradise? Almost overnight, the desert bloomed. A forbidding landscape had been transformed into a land of opportunity. Names like Magic Valley and Treasure Valley tell the story of one of the most successful makeovers in American history. Idaho's heritage is tied directly to her resources, but it took a steel necklace and an iron horse to make it all work. In the 1880s, railroads forever changed the face of a state. Railroads gave people a reason to think they could survive here.
A reporter asked a railroad executive about the role that railroads played in Western development, and the executive responded almost indignantly that the West was a product of railroad development, as if there was no alternative to that. Trains meant the connection between Idaho and the rest of the world. It could take 2 or 3 weeks for mail and news to get to Idaho. And once you began to get regular railroad connections, Idaho was integrated into the rest of the United States in a way that had never been before.
Imagine a state whose traditional industries are farming, logging, mining, and ranching. Now imagine a state where hiking and rafting, horseback riding and mountain biking, fishing and hunting are beginning to outpace some of those traditional industries.
You got a nice fish here, people.
In the span of 20 years, Idaho has become a leader in recreational adventure.
Run. Good.
Of course, the natives have always known Idaho was an adventure. They just called it work. It was something you got used to, day after day. Idaho's rugged mountains, her wild rivers, and those desert canyons, once seen as an impediment to progress, are now viewed as a magnet. Idaho is well suited to be the adventure capital of the nation. Over 60% of the state is federally owned. In central Idaho, that number approaches 100%, with the largest single piece of wilderness in the lower 48. Here, stunning scenery and a solitude that fills the senses provides visitors a chance to experience the last frontier. As Idahoans come to terms with their harsh environment, entire towns have begun transforming themselves as they search to continue the prosperity of the past. But for individuals, The search for adventure is limited only by the imagination.